Hi, my name is Joe Jotkowitz, and I am with the Executive Advisory. We are a boutique consulting firm with roughly 50 plus years of experience in training, development, facilitation, assessments, strategy sessions, offsites. Basically, we say that we take care of the people side of the business. And today we are going to focus on the people side of performance management, including all the different elements that it really does entail. So let's go ahead and take a look at this concept of performance management and start to investigate really the puzzle that it is, and ideally trying to figure out how to put all of these pieces together. As a matter of fact, when I start talking about performance management, it is not uncommon that some of the feedback I get from folks is that as a manager, it's really difficult. I mean, as a manager, how am I supposed to manage other people's performance when I've got my own performance to focus on? How many different conversations am I supposed to have? How often am I supposed to do this? How long are these supposed to be? What are the discussion points I've got to have with my people? Or, this really isn't a good time to start talking about performance management. I mean, we just got done doing RIFs and layoffs. I've got budget freezes. I can't talk about promotion or merit increases. But what about from an employee side of things? Performance management? Yeah, I've heard about it. I mean, I remember when I was onboarded, I was told that there were going to be growth and development opportunities, but I don't really know if I've heard or seen a lot of those. As a matter of fact, candidly, it just doesn't feel very above board or transparent sometimes. I mean, I see other people get opportunities or promotion and that I don't know if I necessarily have opportunities to do. And it just doesn't always feel fair. Can I talk to my manager about it? Do I initiate that with her? I mean, she's already so busy. I don't want to burden her with this. There's a lot of trepidation when it comes to performance management, both on the manager as well as the employee side of things. So let's take a look at first, what really is performance management? Maybe even just beyond an HR checklist. In addition, understanding why it is so important, especially to people and organizations. And then lastly, we're going to take a look at an annual process with different touch points that we can make sure we are doing in order to facilitate this effectively. When we start to take a look at this idea of performance management, one of the first things that we do want to focus on is really, what are we talking about here? So here's a very simple definition of performance management. Performance management is a systematic process. What does this mean? It means that it's not haphazard. It's not done in an ad hoc manner, or I just learned a new skill around performance management in a training session. Now let me just go do that. But rather, it is a thoughtful, deliberate process that is ongoing. It involves planning, meaning thinking ahead, mapping it out. It involves monitoring, meaning observing and evaluating. It involves reviewing, meaning that I am evaluating what is going on and trying to determine what seems to be working and at the same time, maybe what's not. And it involves improving employee performance, meaning I've got to have conversations. I've got to have checkpoints. I've got to give feedback. I've got to have coaching discussions with people. But there is an ultimate goal for this. Ideally, this all should help people align with what they are doing to the larger organizational goals. As a matter of fact, one of the analogies I commonly hear associated with performance management is taking a trip. And when you decide to take a vacation or take a trip, one of the first things you do is set a destination. You set a goal, where I'm going to go. Then you start to map it out. How am I going to get there? Am I going to drive? Am I going to fly? Maybe there are different cities I'm going to stop in along the way. It's not uncommon. I might get feedback from others around their experience and what they would suggest. Maybe even I've got to change course. I've got to change my travel plans midway through because a flight gets canceled or gets rescheduled. Or maybe I run into car trouble. So if you think about it in that regard, it really is a much more intricate process. This is not just an HR exercise. It is a valuable business process when done effectively. And I've got to imagine we all have examples where, unfortunately, this hasn't necessarily been done effectively. As a matter of fact, I do remember working with a client years and years ago. They had a 10% what they called upper out policy, which meant their performance management process was to identify the bottom 10%, and they either had to improve, they would up their performance, or they were out of the organization. And as a result, you might expect it did create a little bit of a hostile, sometimes even overly competitive work environment. Or there's also the example of the SVP that I used to work with, and he would begin his performance management reviews by calling his team into a meeting, having everybody start talking a little bit about what they did for the year, and then asking the following question. So everybody that thinks they did achieve their goals and did a great job this year, go ahead and raise your hand. Jeff, not so fast. Everybody else can leave. Jeff, you and I need to have a performance management conversation. Yeah, as you can imagine, that's probably not necessarily the best approach. Some of the better approaches I have seen is when organizations have used this to really engage employees. As a matter of fact, I've worked with clients who will use goal-setting tools such as KPIs or OKRs, something we're going to reference here in just a few minutes, in order to make sure that the organizational objectives are aligned with what teams and people are doing. I've seen organizations that have used performance management in order to increase communication, increase rapport, increase engagement levels, because they were focusing on coaching and feedback and development discussions. So there really is a lot of benefit associated with performance management, and we don't necessarily always think about it or realize it. As a matter of fact, employee engagement is directly tied to performance management. Companies with a strong performance management process will see engagement levels rise as much as 80%. It is also directly correlated with employee retention, as much as 50%. When you've got effective performance management tools, it can help reduce employee turnover by as much as 50%. And also on an individual people level, it directly correlates with employee satisfaction. Those organizations with a strong performance management process report higher satisfaction rates, as much as 40%, according to Towers Watson. But this isn't just at an individual or people level. This also occurs at a larger organizational level. For example, sales performance. Sales performance increases as much as 27% when you've got effective performance management practices. Also, it is directly tied to financial performance overall. As a matter of fact, organizations with effective practices can experience higher financial performance, up to 60%, according to SHRM. And then lastly, overall work quality. Work quality, it can improve as much as 38% because of regular feedback, regular evaluations, and regular conversations. So as you see, there is a lot of benefit to it. The challenge sometimes is, how do I do this? So let's peel back the curtain a little bit on performance management and start to address all the different elements, all the different components that are associated with it, including feedback conversations, difficult discussions, maybe even taking a look at how can we ensure we are being fair and equitable across the board in our DE&I practices. Now, performance management a lot of the times does get associated or aligned with an annual process. So we can use the calendar as a great way to start thinking about the different types of touch points we should have. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of different pieces to it. So let's go ahead and take a look at each one and what we can do in order to make sure that we are being effective. Beginning with goal setting. So we are coming up on January. At the beginning of the year, it is not uncommon. We might first begin performance management by outlining clear goals and expectations for people. First, we want to take a look at understanding what are the organizational goals out there. What is it the company is trying to achieve? Whether there's certain revenue goals, maybe it's customer satisfaction or client service goals, maybe it's employee retention goals. But we want to know what those are, and then ideally be able to cascade those down to various functions, departments, teams, and eventually individuals. If, for example, as a larger organization, we've got a goal of growth this coming year of 12%, what does that mean for us at a departmental level? How can we contribute to that? And then at a team level, what should we be doing? And finally, at an individual level, what are some of the things that I can do in order to help drive some of that? That is what's meant by cascading or waterfalling these down. We also might want to think about having a motivation conversation at the beginning of the year. It's a great time to start syncing up, better understanding what is it that motivates and drives our people. Ideally, understanding some of that we can use to connect to those goals. I'll give you a little bit of insight here. I've got a colleague, Heather MacArthur, who does a phenomenal job at helping managers and leaders understanding not only what this conversation is all about, but also how to facilitate it. And she does so by really being able to facilitate a conversation. We also might want to take a look at developmental goals. Developmental goals beyond just company organizational goals. Maybe our people are trying to improve certain skills, maybe around AI or supply chain management. Maybe people are looking for more professional developmental goals. I want to focus on my executive presence, or maybe my collaboration or team building. These goals should be discussed and outlined at the beginning of the year. And there's a lot of tools that we can use in order to do this and have these conversations. We can use growth and development plans, SMART goals, KPIs or OKRs, KPIs, key performance indicators, or OKRs, objectives and key results. Both of those tools are great ways to start outlining clear organizational goals, as well as SMART goals, taking a look at outlining them to make sure they are specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. And we'd be more than happy to help with any sort of training or coaching program in order to help managers and people really understand how to use these tools more effectively. But ideally, I have this discussion. I outline these goals and expectations. We are clear now at the beginning of the year on what we're trying to achieve. Then over the next couple of months, I'm going to have several different coaching and or feedback conversations. But before I do, one of the first things I've got to think about in regards to performance management is delegation. Now, when I say this, it's not uncommon. People will pause and ask me, what do you mean? Why? How does delegation align with performance management? Well, very simply, you can't really manage performance if there's no performance that's delegated. And so when we think about delegation, this is beyond just doing their job or doing their duties. But are we delegating certain responsibilities, projects, initiatives that will give people the opportunity to perhaps perform and achieve those developmental goals or those organizational goals? As a matter of fact, I'll give you a quick example. A number of years ago, I was working with an SVP, and he was really trying to improve his executive presence. Unfortunately, he had a tendency to be a little long-winded. He would be redundant, didn't always necessarily answer the question that was asked, and he even came across a little anxious and defensive, especially when the Q&A got a little challenging. Well, that became a developmental goal, and he and I started to talk about it and work on different strategies and techniques for him to improve on that. His manager was aligned, the CFO. However, when we checked in a number of months later, what we found out was that he really had no opportunity in order to work on this skill. Nothing had been delegated to him to present or to share in order to put into practice those executive presence tools. So we want to make sure that we are delegating out, empowering people as well. It is a part of the performance management process, as is evaluation. When we do delegate as managers, it's not just a let go and run, but rather we want to stay in touch. We want to stay connected. We want to make sure that we are evaluating, we are providing some sort of observation and even a little bit of guidance when necessary. How do we do this? Hopefully through, at minimum, our regular one-on-ones. Whether you call it a one-on-one, a check-in, a touch point, a touch base, we want to be doing these on a regular basis. People will sometimes come back to me and ask, well, what is a regular basis? That can be weekly. I've seen where people have done it every other week. I've even seen where people do it once a month, depending on the work and the culture. Some of the conversations we want to have during these regular one-on-ones, ideally some coaching conversations. And there's a few tools that we can take a look at there. Trek is one that we've developed that is really good for managing performance. It's coaching up performance, taking a look at how projects or initiatives are doing and what people can do in order to make sure they're on track and improving. In addition, you can also take a look at Grow or T-Grow. I believe it was Sir Richard Whitmore that ended up developing the Grow model. I think it was Google that adapted it into the T-Grow model. It's a great tool to use in order to help with developmental coaching, taking a look at what are developmental goals and how people can continue the way forward in order to achieve those. In addition to coaching, we also want to make sure that we're giving people regular feedback. Feedback tools such as SBI or SOI, Situation Behavior Impact, Situation Observation Impact, are great in which to outline those discussions. Or one that we've developed, GAIN, is a little bit more comprehensive in approach. But these types of tools can help outline that messaging. Maybe there are times where we also want to do some mentorship, maybe even a little bit of teaching in some of this. But we want to make sure that we are having these regular touch points with our people along the way, and those are aligned back to the goals that we set at the beginning of the year. So we do this for a couple of months, and then we want to think about doing a quarterly check-in. What is a quarterly check-in? It's a little bit more of a formal, structured conversation that does a little bit of review and even projection. When we think about quarterly reviews, we want to make sure that we touch on performance progress. How have things been going? What seems to be working? And at the same time, what is it that you can continue to do and improve on? We might want to take a look at goal tracking. The goals that we set a few months ago, are they still relevant today? Has direction changed? Have we started to invest in new product lines or new areas where we've got to start to adjust our goals? During quarterly check-ins, we also might want to take a look at those engagement levels with people, especially nowadays where we're seeing more and more organizational cultures focus on hybrid and remote work. Are people continuing to stay connected and engaged to the work? And we want to make sure that after every conversation, we continue to offer our ongoing support as managers, making sure that our people know we are in their corner and we've got their back. So April rolls around, we have this quarterly check-in. Then we move back into having those coaching, those feedback discussions, and you're going to see some consistency here. Some might view this as a little bit of rinse and repeat, like the back of a shampoo bottle. But rather than just think about this as rinse and repeat, I like to think about this more as encouragement and reinforcement. The more we talk about it, the more we discuss it, the more important it seems to be on people's radar. So we want to make sure that we're continuing to delegate, continue to evaluate, and continue to have these conversations. One additional item that we might add here around the June timeframe is a little bit of a mid-year preparation. With June, July coming up right around the corner, we might want to start thinking about areas, topics, conversations that we want to align on for our mid-year review. As a matter of fact, hopefully we end up sitting down and having that mid-year check-in conversation, and in doing so, we're going to do a little bit of a first half reflection, not just over the last 3 months, but rather going back all the way to January. When we do, we might even revisit some of those growth and development plans that we established, both around business goals as well as developmental goals. Check in, how are they progressing? What resources do you need? What's been working? What challenges have you had? How have you overcome that? What else do you need from me? What improvements do you see yourself having? We might want to even take a look at goal readjustment. It is not impossible that goals have changed a bit. As they say, the only constant in business is change. So maybe we got to start to take a look at realigning certain numbers or certain expectations. In addition, we might want to check in on those engagement levels again, see where people are at, maybe even circle back to some of those motivation conversations that we touched on. Take a look at how people are feeling about things. Am I continuing to engage my people in the work that they want to be doing? And I might want to now start taking a look at some second half adjustments. Moving forward, here are going to be our goals moving ahead. Here might be some of the areas, the initiatives, the projects that I'll ask you to start taking a look at. And we want to continue to make sure that we give our ongoing support. After we have this mid-year check-in, we're going to go back to doing some coaching and feedback, make sure we're doing our regularly touch bases with people, making sure we're continuing to delegate, evaluate, coach, and give folks feedback. And then we're going to have yet one more quarterly check-in roughly around the October timeframe. Here, one of the elements that we might add, though, is any new developmental goals going into the end of the year. It is not uncommon that year end tends to provide certain opportunities for us as managers, as leaders, even as employees, to focus on initiatives or projects that might be a little bit more year-end focused. We've got a year-end close coming up, or we've got to put together a year-end presentation in order to outline our client involvement and client impact. So are there certain developmental goals that are going to be a little bit more appropriate towards the end of the year? We might want to be considering and thinking about some of those. Then going into the last couple of months, once again, we're going to be doing our delegation or evaluation, coaching and feedback touch points. And now we're also going to probably start thinking about some year-end review preparation. In doing so, if I'm an employee, I probably want to think about doing a self-assessment. And this isn't just an HR process that I got to make sure I check off the list, but rather start thinking about what have you done all year? What's the impact? What's the contribution that has provided? What's been the benefit? It's not that you want to brag about yourself, but you want to make sure you are clearly communicating all that you have done, all that you have contributed to the organization. It can really help your managers get a much more comprehensive view of the whole year, not just the last few months or so. As a matter of fact, one of the frustrations that sometimes I will hear when it comes to year end is that people end up getting a performance review of recency as opposed to a real annual performance review. Here as well, I might start to take a look at reviewing some of those organizational goals that were originally set. How have they been tracking? One other item I might want to take a look at here, reviewing my notes, my files. As a matter of fact, one of the recommendations I like to make is at the beginning of the year, every year, start to establish a journal or a running notepad with each of your people, taking into consideration what have been some of the goals of the objectives they've been after. What touch points have you had? What's been discussed? What improvements have been made? What feedback have you received? What have been some of the outcomes of the coaching conversations or even the feedback you've addressed? Keep notes or keep a file folder on your desktop to be able to drop in that information. That way, when it comes time for the end of the year, you can go back and take a look at the entire year in review. Maybe even to that degree, I want to gather some feedback from folks. Maybe I want to get a little bit of outside perspective on how people have been doing that will feed into this discussion. And even start to put together some individual development plans with people. And you'll see why this is a good strategy to think about towards the end of the year in just a minute. So there's a lot of different elements that can be equated with the performance management process. And if this all starts to feel a little overwhelming, then I'll say, don't do it all. Start small. Maybe with January, start with some goal setting. Maybe start to schedule some regular one-on-ones over the next couple of months and just do a little bit of coaching or feedback. Maybe even don't do a quarterly check-in because it might feel a little too much, but continue to do your regular check-ins and maybe even just incorporate a mid-year review. What I would advise is definitely taking this process and adapting it to your culture, your organization, your team, and your people. But ideally, what we want to make sure that we are doing is constantly aligning their performance with how we are achieving larger organizational goals. And there are a few other considerations when you think about performance management, such as the interview process. What? How does the interview process align or associate with performance management? Well, when we are interviewing candidates, whether we realize it or not, we are already starting to give a little bit of a sense of what performance management might look and sound like. The questions we ask, the areas we cover, the skills that we try and assess with candidates. These are going to be the items that we are going to touch on and address during a performance management process. It's also not uncommon. Candidates might start to ask us a little bit about performance management, promotability, growth and development opportunities. So we want to make sure that we've got answers during that period. Also, an onboarding. When individuals are onboarded into an organization, do we clearly outline how important this process is and what new employees can expect from their managers around performance management? Also, we might think about additional growth and development discussions or conversations. We want to make sure that we're having those with people. Maybe people are interested in developing their skills around AI. That might not necessarily be a direct organizational goal, but that could be something that I want to be able to improve and develop in my role because I do think it will help me achieve some of those goals. We also didn't even touch on difficult conversations. A lot of the times when people think about performance management, they think about when performance goes south, and this is what performance management is all about. It's only a small aspect of performance management, and we definitely need to be well-versed in having these conversations in order to make sure that we are having effective performance management processes. Perhaps even having to know how to do performance improvement plans or PIPs as well. Unfortunately, sometimes performance doesn't necessarily live up to par. And so we've got to be prepared on how to deliver these types of conversations. Promotion, or what I like to refer to as promotability, is probably going to be a discussion point when it comes to performance management. How do I get promoted? What does it take for an upward trajectory? What do I need to do in order to be more promotable? And lastly, what about rewards or bonus or merit increases or awards? All of that usually gets tied to the performance management process on whole as well. So there are a lot of additional considerations we just want to make sure that we are at least aware of in the performance management process. And there is quite a bit of benefit at the larger organizational level when we are able to do this effectively. As a matter of fact, and once again, I will give credit to my colleague Heather, as she talks through when we are able to do year-round performance management processes, it helps us to develop clear performance plans for employees and being able to connect those back to the larger organizational goals, which then helps reinforce individual development plans, different skills, competencies, and areas that employees might want to work on and develop in support of those goals. Well, I have these conversations all year round at an individual or a team level. It helps to feed into the larger annual talent process at a company level. Here now, I understand where we need to start allocating time, money, and resources into helping our employee population develop those skills, those abilities that are going to feed into the larger organizational goals. And I can even start thinking about succession planning. Where are those skills? Where are those gaps that I might need to account for because we don't have them internally or because we aren't able to develop them internally? This occurs at the larger functional company level. When both of these processes are operational in a company, what you find is that they are intertwined and they help feed one another in order to build a much more effective performance management process at the larger, bigger picture. So there really is a lot to it. And we want to be able to help. Please feel free to reach out to us if we can be a help as a thought partner in thinking through different processes and procedures when it comes to performance management. As a matter of fact, most of our clients have some sort of online performance management system, but we still need to be able to have the conversations with people, and we can help with some of that. If you are looking for training around any of these types of processes or conversations, whether it's how to have effective coaching conversation, how to talk about growth and development, how that differs from promotion, how to have feedback discussions, how to set clear goals and expectations, we're more than happy to help. Or maybe even provide some one-on-one coaching for managers or leaders in this regard. You'll see here as well, there's a QR code on the screen. This links to a list of our classes, our offerings, our trainings around all of these items. So please feel free to reach out and help. Feel free to reach out. We'd like to help. And lastly, I will let you know that next month, that brilliant colleague that I was mentioning, Heather, she will be doing our December webinar around your internal compass. As there's a lot of stuff going on right now in the work environment, being able to navigate uncertainty, chaos, and noise and really be able to focus your inner thoughts on the work at hand. Tuesday, December 17th from 11 to 11:30 Pacific time. Please feel free to reach out to us. We want to help. Connect with us on our socials. We hope to see you there.